Good day, everybody. Thank you for making time to join us at this rollout webinar where I will be taking you through the revised funding model. A special welcome to our industry participants and all our stakeholders. A bit of background before I tap into the funding model. The CGSO is a compulsory industry ombud scheme which was established in 2013 in terms of Section 82 of the Consumer Protection Act. We operate under the Consumer Goods and Services Industry Code of Conduct, which was promulgated by the Minister of Trade and Industry in April 2015. Non-compliance with the code is contravention to the Section 82 of the Consumer Protection Act. We, as the CGSO, has been set up as a not-for-profit organization which is funded by participant fees. Since inception, the CGSO has dealt with more than 110,000 calls through our in-house call center. We have received 37,200 complaints and closed 33,808 complaints. The scheme is run by a small team comprising of 28 permanent employees, 3 part-time adjudicators, and we have recently taken on 2 interns. The CGSO is governed by the Board of Directors. And in the Board of Directors, we have representatives from industry who are our retailers and manufacturers. We also have consumer bodies and independent directors. In the year 2019-2020, the office has received 22,625 complaints through our call center, and we have received 9,529 complaints and closed 8,606 complaints. We take pride in the fact that since inception, the office has managed to increase participants from 24 founder participants in April 2015 to 804 at the end of the financial year, which is the 29th of February 2020. Despite the fact that the complaints kept increasing every year, the office never increased participation fees. In terms of Section 6 of the Consumer Goods and Services Industry Code, the Board of Directors is empowered to determine the fees from time to time, and these are the fees that we are now talking about today. Since inception, the CGSO has worked and generated revenue based on the startup model that was adopted from inception. This was now from 2013 until 2017. The categories of businesses were categorized into 6 different groups, which is Group 1 to Group 6. Group 1 being the highest group and Group 6 being the lowest group. The Group 1 used to pay 250,000, although the code allows the board to charge the joining fee and the special levy. From inception, we have never charged a special levy or joining fee. It was just the annual fees, which are 250 for Group 1, 150,000 for Group 2, 50,000 for Group 3, and 3,000 for Group 4. Group 5 also paid 1,500, and the last group being Group 6 never paid any fee. These are the businesses that generate less than 1 million per annum. And the reason for this is that it's in line with the mandate of the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud that requires us to improve the standard of business in the industry. So it is encouraged that as much as the businesses do not generate more than 1 million, they are still obliged to join the scheme. So in 2018, as I said before, the board re-looked at the fees, and as promised since inception, that as the number of participants grow, the board will re-look at the funding model. And it was in 2018 that the fees were also revised, and it resulted in Group 1, 2, and 3's fees being dropped by 20%, and a slight increase for Group 4 and Group 5, and Group 6 continued to not pay any fees. How this funding model or the startup model came about, it was under the leadership of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. The industry elected the working group, And the list of this working group is reflected in our 2015 annual report, which is on our website. You are more than welcome to visit there and see who were the industry representatives in the time in which the funding model was set up. There is a process that was followed, which was very consultative with the industry. The model was gazetted and comments were received and considered before the startup model was agreed upon. Throughout the years, we received feedback from the industry, and there were other identified gaps in the initial model, which is the startup model. This is the reason why the board saw it fit that we must now sit and review the model in order to address these identified gaps and to spread the burden and provide relief as the number of participants are increasing to fulfill the promise that was made since inception. Now, in terms of the feedback that we received from industry, these are the identified challenges that the current funding model presented. One, it was identified that there was no basis of calculation. If you look from group 1 to group 6, the fees that were being paid by each group were not based on a formula. Therefore, the formula that was used there was inconsistent, and this is the feedback that we kept receiving from industry. And the fee differences from each group to another was too big in other instances. Group 4 in particular, the category was too wide. We indicated that the board decided to relook at this in order to correct those identified mistakes or the identified challenges that we saw in the startup model. What we did is that we benchmarked, we considered the feedback from industry, and we also obtained board approval. In benchmarking, we have looked internationally and locally, and our findings were that most of the ombudsman offices are funded by government or through a levy that is raised against participating businesses, and that levy is collected by government in most instances. Locally, most of the ombudsman offices are funded by participating businesses in proportion to their size or the number of complaints that are received by the office on an annual basis. The following are other methods that were considered in reviewing the funding model. The first one being the cost per case. Most of the offices locally are using this model, and for the CGSO, it was seen to be not sustainable. The second other model that we looked at is the operating costs that are taken and shared amongst all the participants. That was found to also not going to be sustainable for the office of the CGSO. Another model that we considered was the incentive and penalty, in which participants who are not generating any complaints are given an incentive, or those that are generating more complaints are then charged a penalty. That was going to result in an administrative burden for our office. As I said earlier, that the scheme is run by a very small team of about 28 full-time staff. And lastly, we re-looked at the current model that we're using, which is the revenue-based model. This model was seen to be much more sustainable in the fact that it was tried before, and this is the model that the office has been operating in since inception. There are key considerations that were taken into account in revising this model. Whichever model that is going to be adopted needed to be sustainable, easy to understand, easy to calculate, inexpensive, and easy to collect. After considering all this, the board saw that the revenue-based model will be the model that we will go with. And that is the model that was approved. However, most importantly, we had to correct the errors that were identified since inception. The key amendments include the following. The board in the end approved the revenue-based model, which is the current model that we're currently using. However, the key challenges that were raised earlier had to be taken care of or had to be corrected in the revised model. One, the formula is now introduced. You will notice that across all the groups that have now been formed, the fees will average between 0.004% and 0.005%. That was done in order to guide this whole process, because most of the time we used to get complaints, or we used to get questions from the industry saying that what is the basis of this model? Now we have created a formula. Secondly, we have introduced a new super group. Initially, the funding model started at group 1. So the group 1 has now been split into 2, forming the super group and the group 1. Super group comprises of all businesses that are generating revenue of above 5 billion per annum. Group 1 are now businesses generating revenue between 3 billion to 5 billion per annum. You will note that in the new revised model, Group 1 to Group 3's fees have been reduced by an average of 20%. This includes the super group, which previously paid 200,000. Their fees are now reduced to 180,000 per annum. In the past, as I indicated, that we used to get feedback about Group 4. Group 4's unwieldy parameters were also addressed, which resulted in a slight increase in their fees. Group 4 is now split into 2 groups, which is now the new Group 4 and Group 5. And their fees used to be 3,500. There is a slight increase there. And in Group 5, there is also a slight increase. Group 6 and Group 7's fees are maintained. In front of you is a new revised funding model. We have included, if you can look, and on your far left is the startup model, which operated between 2013 and 2017. Then the current model, which is going to operate until 28 February 2021. We have shown this side by side so that you can see how we have moved from the startup model to the current model that we are now launching. As I said earlier, Group 1 Plus, or the super group, are all businesses that are generating above 5 billion per annum. Their new revised fees are going to be 180,000, which is a 20,000 rand decrease from the current model. Group 1 are the businesses between 3 billion and 5 billion, and their new fees are 160,000 per annum, which is a reduction of 40,000 rand per annum. Group 2 still maintain the same parameters of 1 billion to 3 billion, but their fees have been dropped by 30,000 per annum. The new fee is now 90,000 per annum. Group 3, all the businesses that are above 500 million and 1 billion per annum, their new fee is now 35,000, which is a 5,000 rand drop compared to the current fee. Group 4 and Group 5 are resulting from the previous Group 4. We have now split that group into 2, coming up with a new Group 4 and Group 5, and their fees are now 5,500, and for Group 5 is 3,500. This is the slight increase that I was talking about earlier, where I said that you will notice that due to the new formula that we have now implemented, it will result in a slight increase in the 2 groups. And that is unfortunate, because we wanted to be consistent with the new formula that was now formed in order to have a basis on this new model. Now we have Group 6, which is all businesses that are generating between 1 million and 50 million per annum, and their fees are remaining the same as 1,680 per annum. And the last group is a group 7, which was the old group 6. Those ones are not going to pay a fee. So you will see that when you compare the current model and the new revised model, we are now having 7 groups as opposed to the previous 5 groups that we have. You will note that in the period that we're in of the COVID-19 pandemic, the board was also cognizant in looking at the new funding model. This review of funding model was accelerated to serve as a relief on the financial distress which was resulted from this COVID-19 pandemic. So you will notice that this will give relief to the businesses that for the longest time were carrying the Office of the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman and making sure that all our operations are paid for. What you can expect as the next step, now that we have rolled out the new funding model, which was approved by board and will be effective in the next financial year, what the participants can expect is a communication from the CGSO. We will send out letters to all our participants. Secondly, we will request all our participants to update their details online. There is a link which we'll put on our website, which when you follow it, you'll be able to update your details. Alternatively, you can send an email to tsakane@cgso.org.za. Once we receive your information, we will then update our database using the new information that you would have sent to us. Secondly, we are going to request all our participants to confirm their group levels. As I've indicated earlier, we now have 7 groups as opposed to the former 5 groups. So the submission of financial statements will help us categorize you in the right group and make sure that you benefit from the revised model. We request all our participants to submit their annual financial statements or a letter from the auditors confirming their annual revenue. After we have received that, you will then receive a confirmation from the CGSO confirming your new group. In March 2021, you will then receive the new invoice, which is in line with the information that you have given to us or the information that you have now updated online. Something to note is that the implementation date for the new funding model is the 1st of March 2021. So you will notice that we are left with very few months. I think we are left with 4 months before we can implement the new model. So we will request that the participants work with us and cooperate with us in order to make this a success. A sincere gratitude to all the participants who are committed to complying with the Consumer Protection Act and the Consumer Goods and Services Industry Code. It is through your contribution that we are able to make this Office of the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman a success, and we continue to thank you for all your contributions over the years. After this, we are going to have a Q&A session in which we'll be addressing all your questions, and I believe that as I was going through the presentations, you have put under the chat box all your questions that we will be happy to address. If you didn't do so, you are more than welcome to raise your hand, and then we'll be able to address your questions directly. Thank you very much for taking time, and we look forward to a continued relationship with you as our participants.